No, it's fine. I can send that. I'll see you. Okay, we'll get going. Can you guys all hear me on the Zoom? No?
I can hear you.
Great. So we haven't got Brett today. He's busy saving back somewhere. So you have to put up with me. Your sellotape didn't last very long. It's a work in progress, this room. That's
Okay, no, week by week.
Okay. So what are we doing today? We're doing, it's really difficult to see, isn't it? We're doing searching, basically. Finding evidence to answer questions for critical appraisal. Anyone not done a systematic review?
A long time ago. Yeah.
It's okay. It hasn't changed. Those of you on Zoom, have you done? Anyone not done a critical appraisal of some type or other? A systematic review? I can't see you all because we're sharing the screen, so you just have to shout out. Deafening silence.
I've done one, but no one's interested in me.
You good? Okay, fine. Let's move on before I cancel the entire meeting. What everyone's doing there. Okay. So there's a number of reasons why we might search literature, and most of it comes down to the fact that until you look, you don't really know what you don't know. And we've got a bunch of things here as to why we might do it. But the reality is that we spend most of our lives only seeing a tiny chunk of the evidence around any one particular question. And I'm always surprised at the amount of data that is out there for things that I think I actually know quite a bit about that I've never heard of before. When you do research, you can often find information that you don't realise is out there. So until you look, you don't know what you don't know. That is why it's so tedious when you listen to people talking about stuff when they haven't really looked properly or kept up to date, because most people think they know most things about most stuff. Certainly orthopedic surgeons. So you spend a lot of time listening to people talk about stuff which is just completely wrong, or at best a very biased, selected group of studies that they happen to remember from 20 years ago when they last looked in their books. So systematic reviews are important, and the search is a key part of it, really, or at least one key step. Synthesizing the evidence is clearly important, but if you don't do a proper search, you'll never get a correct answer. So we're going to spend most of our time today talking about actually how you do it in a kind of practical way. And so these are the three things really that I think you should consider, the first and the last being the most important. So we're going to do a bit of revision. Who remembers how to structure a research question? Let me find out if I can find you online. You see it online. This is the problem when you're doing. How can we not be signed in? Everyone must be signed in on Zoom. Reluctant. Okay, Kat, you're doing a systematic review at the moment. I would need someone to prove that I'm in the room here and you can hear me. Lost Kat.
Okay, I'm here. I'm just very slow.
Oh, right. Do you mean your computer's slow or you're slow?
No, I am slow because everyone got really good at Teams while I was on mat leave, and I didn't get that CPD training, so I'm definitely
We're not
behind.
Zoom, that might be part of the problem.
Oh well, that probably doesn't help. No.
So come on, how are you putting your research questions together for performing a search?
Well, I'm doing a PICO, of course.
Okay.
I don't know what more you want to know.
So what does PICO stand for? I know you know this.
So I've got my patient group, which is the complex trauma group. I've got my intervention, which is looking at rehabilitation. I've got comparator, which is looking and trying to find out more about what standard care is. And the outcome is yet to be fully defined, but it's looking at obviously things like quality of life and progress with rehabilitation. I haven't really fully decided on what that is yet.
Okay.
There you go. There you go.
No, that's great. That's brilliant. So, so laying out a PICO is helpful for designing a study, and it's helpful for designing a systematic review, which is just a type of study anyway. And we'll talk about how we take the PICO and turn it into a search in a second. What do we mean by synonyms? Who else is online there? Are you able to look? I can't. Let's see. Oh, here we are. Okay, Eleanor, I know you're listening because I've heard your builders in the background. Not going to unmute. There she goes. Here we go. What do we mean by synonyms in this context? Do you think?
I'm not too sure, sir.
Okay, fair enough. You see one and you help Eleanor. What do you think?
Possibly, like, for example, if you're saying like, obviously they mean words which mean the same thing but different, like different words which mean the same thing, but it's like, for example, I feel like I've done it when I'm using like Medline, for example. You do, let's say, so I'm really sorry, I can't describe it very well, but it's like for example, like say hip replacement, for example, then you'd use like hip arthroplasty or something like that.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Well done. So obviously synonyms means the word means the same, but we're looking for words that we commonly use in biomedical science. And if someone's put it in their paper, they called their paper hip replacement, you still want to know about their questions, as well as hip arthroplasty. And so synonyms is just a way of making sure that your search captures all of the information that you want it to, as opposed to just the language that you've expressed your PICO. And we'll talk a little bit in a bit about how we figure out what the important synonyms might be, and ways of tackling that as a problem. Okay, so types of literature we're going to search. Catalogued is the lion's share of it. Catalogue is stuff like Medline. There's lots of different catalogues out there. And in different types of practice, there's more or less appropriate catalogues, right? So if you're interested in surgery, then Medline is a good place to go. If you're interested in qualitative research or different types of research, there might be more appropriate databases than Medline. And there's a whole range of them. What do you guys search when you're looking for physio stuff? Do you search Medline?
Yeah, but probably along with like a bunch of others as well.
Yeah, so what are the databases?
Ones that come to mind is like Cinna
Yeah.
or names.
No, there's a bunch, and it's important that you search the right places, because you won't get many hits otherwise. And typically we search a bunch of catalogues and then we compile the results. So there's a whole kind of deduplication process where results from one database might be exactly the same as results from another database. That sounds really easy to deduplicate, but often the databases don't present the metadata, which is the data about the study. So like the title, the authors and stuff, they don't present them in the same way. And so when your software like EndNote or whatever software you're using to combine the searches, combines things and deduplicates it, you can end up with lots of duplicates still in, which is bloody tedious. But that's just how it is, because they're not catalogued in the same way. So I've answered the easy one. What's grey literature? Who we got on there? Oh, Lawrence let me into everyone's names. Here we go. Harry. I've got you all now. Harry, what do you reckon the grey literature means?
Oh, I'm afraid I'm not actually really sure, to be honest with you. Is it something about being ambiguous in terms of typing it?
That's fine. So these are the two types. So it's almost like catalogued and not catalogued, except we don't call it not catalogued. We call it grey literature. So this is literature that is out there in the sense that somebody knows about it, but it's not made it to the databases. Now, it might not have made it to the databases because where it's published doesn't publish into a database. So the Annals of the Royal College of Surgery, for example, is not a Medline catalogued journal. So if you publish there, it will never appear in Medline, which is probably okay because it's the Annals of the Royal College of Surgery and it's pretty low level. So it's not a big issue. But there are things out there which don't make it into the big catalogues. And secondly, and more commonly, more problematic, is a study is done and then it's never published. Or it only makes it to a conference and it never makes it to a publication. And so you can't find it because it never gets catalogued. And that is grey literature. And there's sort of big argument about, non-peer reviewed literature, what should you do with it? Is it sensible to incorporate it or not? Who knows what all the answers are? And you need to make some decisions when you're doing your study and you're searching. But searching the grey literature means searching literature which is not catalogued in the big online databases. So searching the catalogued literature is quite easy. You write your PICO, which we've got here, population intervention comparison and outcome. You write that down on a piece of paper. And then what you're trying to do is you're trying to find the subset of all the studies out there which occupy this central patch in the middle. So people in the right population, studies that have the right intervention, and studies that have the right comparison group, and studies that report outcomes of interest to you. And so it's only the little bit in the middle, which means that you should only find a few studies, fingers crossed. Now, we talked a little bit about places that you might look and also search engines that you might use. So Google is a search engine for the internet, but you get specific search engines, just like Google, that instead of them searching the total internet, they search subsets of other databases. So Medline was mentioned, and that's the National Library of Health Services, which you can see at the top. Medline is their database, and it's searched with a thing called PubMed, which you can get to online, and people use that. But that's only one. It's a bit like Hoover is one type of vacuum cleaner, right? Everyone's heard of PubMed, but there are lots of them. And you can see that actually there's a large number of different, this is only a tiny subset of different databases or research that has been conducted and is being conducted. And they all have slightly different pictures. So some of them are clinical trials registration pages, some of them are published journals. And it's really difficult to maintain a knowledge of all of this stuff and how to search it. So the top tip here is talk to librarians. So it doesn't matter where you're working, what your kind of institution is, you will have library services. So The NHS has a library service in all the hospitals, and the librarians are good at using these bits of information. And often they'll do the whole search for you. If you give them the Pico, they'll construct the search. So using librarian is a top tip. If you work in a university, they also have library services, and the librarian there, or the library services, will be able to put you together with these pieces of information. So trying to maintain, and in fact, there's a whole kind of branch of this now called information specialism or information specialists. So, librarian's a bit of an old-fashioned word, but those people are expert at accessing online information. But if you're going to do it, or at least talk to your librarian about it, this is what they're going to do. They are going to build a search which starts from the Pico as your reference point, and they're going to create a bunch of synonyms for that search, or for each term. So for the population, you're going to say adults, and then they might write down a whole bunch of synonyms, and the synonyms typically are database specific, so they will use words for each database, and that's why expertise around how the database is constructed is so important. Right, and the next one, Boolean operands. That sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? Anyone know what a Boolean operand is?
So like something where it's a plural or a singular, and you add in different
that's a good tip, but that's not a Boolean operand.
don't know.
Anyone do logic gates and stuff? The GCSEs, remember those? You must have done logic gates. So a Boolean operand is something like and, not, if. So they're commands, like they're logic commands. So Boolean operands allows you to group together a whole bunch of synonyms. So you might say you're interested. We'll take Yassine's example of hip replacement. Say you're interested in patients with hip fracture who have had a hip replacement. You might say hip fracture and hip replacement, not internal fixation. So there, you're interested in your hip replacements, and you're interested in hip fracture. You're also interested in hip replacement, and you're not interested in people that have had internal fixation. And so it allows you to refine your search, and using the synonyms and the Boolean operands together is the real skill of librarians. And they'll take you from a search that looks like 25,000 returned studies down to a couple of hundred of highly relevant studies. And that's where their expertise comes in. So they take all the synonyms for the PICO, so the population, the interventions, and the outcomes. They write down the list of synonyms, and then they combine all of those words together using those Boolean terms, and some clever stuff like putting asterisks in if you want plurals, or if you want something like, if you've got a word like, I'm trying to think of an example now, multiple spellings, like orthopedics, it's got an A and an E, depending upon which language it's written in. And so you can write ortho P star, and it'll take everything that has ortho P, and then all the letters afterwards. So they've got lots of tricks like that. And then they run the search, and you basically iterate that until you end up with a search that makes sense. And you can refine it by doing screening of your results, not the final screening, but you can look at your results, review the results, and see if you're getting lots of hits which are totally relevant. And if you are, you can refine your search down by adding in those sorts of not operands. You keep doing that until you've come up with a search you think is specific enough in that you're not getting lots of stuff you don't want, but sensitive enough as in it's picking up the studies that you know that are out there that are relevant to your question. Okay, so that's how you do it. So we're going to have a go. So a piece of paper. Everyone needs a piece of paper now? You've got a piece of paper? Or a computer, or if you're like an iPad with a pen, or you high-tech people at home, you've probably got like on your phone screen. So here's our PICO. In children aged under 18, I don't know where he got this from. Maybe this is one of our questions from last week. Does early repair of the ACL rupture rather than 6 weeks of physiotherapy give better ability to return to football at, that's supposed to be, not but, 3 months? So note your PK down. That's your clinical question. Here you got this patient. I remember when I was a med student, we used to have these rapid search tutorials. And this was in the day when the internet was a new thing. So most of you on the call, not quite everyone in this room, but most of you on the call probably don't remember when the internet wasn't an actual thing. But there was a time when the internet was new. And there was this whole bit of my medical student training, which was the idea was that what you're going to do was see a patient and work out a PICO question for that patient, and then run a literature search, and you were going to get the answer in clinic. This was the concept. And that's what NHS evidence was built to do.
Did it work?
No, because there's so much information out there, you can't possibly synthesize it in that timeline. But that was the theory. The theory was you were going to be able to use this internet thing, the Facebook, to answer questions. And people would go around with their computers on ward rounds and just knock out research questions and answer them bang, as though the quality of the research we're producing is so definitive, you could just find the answer. It was a nice aspiration, it hasn't quite panned out. Anyway, that is our research question. Everyone got that down? Anyone need more time at home? Hands up. Okay, good. All right. Here's our synonym grid. So what we want is population intervention, comparison outcome. Write down one word in each one that looks good for your research question, and then think all of the different synonyms that might be important. How else can we express intervention, comparison, outcomes? Now, this is not an arbitrary thing to do. This is exactly what your librarian, if you turn up to your librarian with this table, you have the answer, you have your search knocked out of the park within about 3 or 4 hours. Because you've done all the work that they can't do. This is the bit which requires your expertise. They will go and check the synonyms in their databases as well, but this gives them a massive head start. So let's try and get 3 or 4 synonyms for populations. A bit less obvious because there's not many ways of saying kids. And then I think on our next slide we've got some ideas. I worked out what's in these sandwiches yet. About 3 weeks.
I think it's some kind of like tofu thing.
It's not coronation chicken, is it?
No, coronation slavering.
Coronation's something.
Yeah.
But not chicken.
Sorry, Professor, could you go back for a second just on the question again?
Oh my goodness.
Sorry.
You know how much you're pushing our tech here. There you go.
Cheers.
Maybe we can
That's
leave
all
that
right.
up.
I screenshot it anyway.
It's not too difficult. Okay, how are we doing? Everyone good? So this is a different example. because then they'll do your work for you. But you can see how we've got a bunch of things. This is another Pico essentially. But it's about how well helicopters improve clinical outcomes for people with injuries. But you can see there there's several different words being used to describe it. How do we get on with our Pico? I'm going to give you a pass on population. Kids are kids, right?
Pediatrics.
Okay, fair enough. Pediatrics. Good. Children.
Not adults.
Not adults. Yes, you've got not adults. Teenagers. Yeah, good.
We're on it.
All right. And what were our interventions? Surgery. Yeah.
ACL reconstruction.
Anything else?
You could like write out anterior cruciate ligament instead of ACL.
Yeah. Good.
Can you write the different types?
Yeah.
It's like a hamstring,
Yeah.
graft, or patella.
Definitely. So there's different types of ACL surgery. So we just heard of different reconstruction options. You can talk about soft tissue knee surgery. Okay. And then, rehab. Here we go. This is like the longest list in the world. So what different ways can we talk about rehab?
Physical therapy, which is actually working.
Yeah.
Exercise therapy.
Just therapy.
Therapy, yeah.
Surgical.
Yeah.
Rehabilitation.
Yeah. Rehabilitation we've got.
That's sports rehabilitation. This is
Sports rehab, yeah.
specific.
Yeah. Because all these might come under different titles or whatever, might they? Anything else for you guys on the virtual meet? Any other ideas for how to describe the non-operative component? Okay. And then outcomes. What did we actually say? Return to football. Okay. How might we describe that? Because I'm unlikely to have a study which is exclusively about return to football.
Return to play.
Yeah, return to sport.
This sounds really basic, but instead of football, like soccer for the Americans.
Yep, soccer. Good. Okay. So you can see how if you took a table like this to your librarian, they would have a lot more information to give you a much better quality search. And all of this is actually helping you, because the really boring bit of this is screening it all and deciding what's relevant and what's not relevant. So the more work you do on this bit, the shorter the number of studies that will come back will be, and the higher your hit rate. Your hit rate is going to be down in the few percents anyway, at best. And sometimes it's in fractions of a percent. So depends how many times you want to have to read abstracts to exclude it. But I would say this is the most important bit. Your librarian can help you with the other parts. They can't really help you with this, because this is where your clinical knowledge comes in. Okay, good. And this is an example of what your librarian would help you to do to find the intervention. So we had the intervention of helicopter services or whatever, right? So here, this is what they turn it into. And this stuff is specific to each one of the databases. So the way you write this down is database specific. So you can see, for example, up here, number 8, this is a term that is rotary adjacent to the word wing. So rot, asterisk, so rotary, rotation, any rote something, next to a word wing. So that's a term. And then .ab, comma T means search only in the abstract and title. So you've got rotary craft, rotary aircraft, and you could put a star before the craft to say whether it's aircraft or just craft, and again, abstract and title. And then MP, you could see, is a specific way of calling. So if you look at number 10, for those of you on Zoom, what it's saying is wrote something craft dot MP is searching MP, where MP is the title of the abstract, the original title, the name of a word, the subject heading word. So this is a whole bunch of metadata attached to each one of the catalogs. And you're searching, rather than searching within the text of the document of the actual publication, you're searching in the metadata that's been extracted when it got put on. What else have we got? Number 1 here, air ambulance /. That is part of something called a mesh term, which we'll come on to later. But air ambulance / means that you're looking at all of the exploded tree after air ambulance. So we'll talk about mesh terms in a second. But you can see how you need quite a bit of expertise to put that together, and your librarian can definitely help you with it. The ability of this way of searching to find what you want compared to you just typing into PubMed air ambulance, I mean, there's like night and day in terms of the quality of what you get out. So that's why, you know, I can barely bother to read stuff. When you read someone's search and it's got 5 words in a paper, it's not even worth reading. Okay, good. So I'm not saying you need to go learn that, because you won't, and you won't ever be very good at it unless you become a specialist in it. But what I'm saying is that is what can be produced, and you've all got access to do it at that level because you've all got library services available to you. So just make use of them. Booleans, talks about that. Okay, here you go. And, or, not are the 3 common ones that we use, and you can see in the diagram what it means. And what you need to decide and help your librarian with is which part of your synonym list should be anded and which part should be ordered. They'll already and all of the components of the PICO by definition. They'll know that you need it in this population with this intervention, this control, and these outcomes. They'll do that by themselves. But within the columns of the table, they might need some help with and, ors, and nots. So here's the arthroplasty, not internal fixation, in terms of the interventions. Or might be kids or adolescents. And is a good example of the different columns. So we'd have 4 columns here, right? So we'd have a population column, an intervention column, all landed together with the comparison and the outcome. And that's that little circle in the middle. When you put these searches together, they normally run over a couple of pages, because you can imagine that just for that one synonym earlier on, air ambulance, we had all that text just to get down air ambulance. And they will be combined with these Booleans anyway. So all of that would be anded together, or probably ored together, sorry. And then that whole term is going to get ored with another term. So these things become massive. When you look at a Cochrane review, there's often like 5 or 6 pages of the search. So Booleans are really important to refine the search. And then how do you actually run it? How do you do that? Well, PubMed is not great, but if you use something a bit different, like Scopus, or there's other ways of searching Medline. Every one of your when you construct the search, you construct it using rows. So row 1 might be, let's go back to our example, kids. So row 1 is kids, row 2 is adolescents, row 3 is, or line 3 is teenagers. Line 4 is 1 or 2 or 3, becomes line 4. And then that kind of defines your population. And then you do that for your population, your intervention, your control, and your outcome. and you'll combine that with ands and nots. And each time you're basically combining lines until eventually your last line might be, you know, just 17 and 28 and 41 until you got your PICO written down in just 4 terms. And across on the right-hand side, you'll see the number of studies returned by each one of those rows as an independent search. And that helps you to work out which terms are useful in your search for restricting size. And it also allows you to go back to the search and tweak it. So if you decide, oh, well, I don't quite like my definition of population, I can tweak those rows just by themselves. And then you can see, for example, here we've got row 40 is the population, the intervention, and the outcome, 30, 31, 39. Then I deduplicate it. So deduplicate row 40. Then I limit it to humans, and then I end up with my list. That might be one way to do it. You can add other limits in as well. Like, for example, you might limit it to English only studies, or you might limit it to studies in the last 20 years or whatever. There's a whole bunch of different ways of limiting it. And you end up with a very long list of studies, nearly always. And it's time for you to do your work. Okay, so anyone heard of mesh terms or used them before? No? Anyone on Zoom used mesh terms before? Okay. So, you know when you do a publication and they ask for your keywords, your keywords are to help them fix your study content into the mesh hierarchy. So the mesh hierarchy is a massive kind of dictionary, structural dictionary, that starts off with really, really, really big conceptual terms across all sorts of different domains. So study design, whether it's on humans or animals, whether it was about engineering, medicine, linguistics, whatever. And then each of those categories then gets broken down into subcategories, and every subcategory gets broken down into another subcategory. And this has got a hierarchy which is many, many, many rows deep. And so it starts off very narrow and ends up very big. And when you do your keywords, those keywords get sent by the journals to Medline, and somebody, I can't believe it's a person anymore, presumably it's an algorithm, indexes your study, and it assigns it mesh terms. And so right down in the bottom somewhere there will be right-sided hamstring reconstruction of your ACL. So if that was really what your intervention was about, you only want the right-sided hamstring ACL reconstructions. But if you're interested in right and left-sided hamstring ACLs, they'll be in one category above, which would be hamstring ACL reconstruction. And then above it, there'll be a category which is ACL reconstruction, which branches into maybe patella tendon versus hamstring. And so that's how the hierarchy works. And you can search that hierarchy. So when you go onto PubMed, instead of searching Medline, you can search the mesh database. So there's a row of titles on PubMed, and one of them says mesh. If you click on mesh, you get your same search box, but now you can search the hierarchical structure of mesh. So you type in children, and it will then find all the references within mesh for children, and you can choose at which level you want to put your search term in at. So there's a list of the number of rows that you want to go down, and you can pick the appropriate one. And then you can type .exp called explode, which then either searches for the term by itself or the term and all of its derivative terms in the hierarchy. The reason it's useful is that the person that wrote the article, who generated the keywords, has flagged what this article really is about, and so you don't get so many false hits, which are not helpful. And if they're useful, but they're rely on them, yeah. So typically
Do that
we
as
use,
well.
yeah, we do that as well. So I normally search by the actual terms themselves, and then we'll search by the mesh terms too. And then you might do a combination where you say you need to have the mesh and the other ones, and look at how many you lose. So that'd be a good example where you use mesh terms to produce one row of your search, and then you do a bunch of non-mesh terms just to produce your other row of search, and then you add them together, and you see how many studies appear in both. Shows how
Can you
good
do
your
that all at
search
the
is
same
working.
time?
But again, you either have to be doing it a lot of systematic review, or you just go and talk to your librarian. But your librarian knows all this. Now, mesh is only relevant to the National Library of Medicine, so Medline, but all of the databases have got their own version of mesh. But then the words aren't the same. Slightly unhelpful. It's not a generic catalogue. I don't think the grey literature. I think the important thing about grey literature is to understand, is to take a view as to whether you're going to include it or not. And historically, we didn't include it, but now increasingly we see rapidly produced research which is not peer reviewed. I'm not pretty sure how to interpret that. Whether it's a good thing or not. I think you just have to take a view when you're doing a search. You have to take a personal view as to whether you're going to believe that data or not. How do you go about doing it? What do you reckon? How are you going to find something that's not online?
Could you look in like places like ResearchGate or things like that where people might have uploaded things but not
Yeah.
published them, if you like?
Yeah. So there are starting to be places to publish which are not journals, so free online repositories, and people are starting to put stuff in those. So that is increasing. Yes. If you wanted to find something out about something, what would you do? Just generally. If you wanted to find, yeah, ask someone. You can talk to people. So if you know your field quite well, there'll probably be a handful of people around the world that will be constantly publishing in that area. So you can just email them. Or if you're reviewing it, it might be an area you're interested in anyway. You might know that people are working on stuff. And so you might say, look, you know that study you did a few years back, where has it gone? Oh, well, we never finished it, but I've got the data. There's loads of that kind of stuff. So you can definitely ask people.
Would you look at like trials registries as well to see if
Yeah.
trials have been registered but never finished?
Yeah, so trial registries are places where high quality studies are registered prospectively. And we ought to publish all of those, but we don't. And that's a topic of great debate. But you can look in the registry and then you can chase up the author to find out where the study is. And then Brett's got a couple of other ideas. You can look on big policy places like NICE. If there's a guideline for NICE, you can look in the index of the guideline for studies, that kind of stuff. You can go to things like ATOCP or BOA or whatever and see if they've got any guidance in the area and see what they've referenced. But it is massively labour intensive because essentially you're hand manual searching everything. So typically I don't do it. I just say we didn't search great literature.
Is it quite accepted to say we didn't search great literature, or is it something that you'll get kind of criticised?
No, I don't think you get criticised because you can always defend it by saying we didn't search great literature because we only wanted peer-reviewed published papers because there's a quality metric associated with that.
Yeah.
The downside is that there may be other evidence out there that you haven't added to your review. So it may not be the totality of evidence. Yeah, so these are places where Brett's given you some places to go. I mean, doing this sort of hand searching is just unbelievably immensely time consuming. He's written there, where's the line? I think an easy line is a peer-reviewed published paper. Typically, I would include a conference abstract, which is not peer-reviewed, therefore, or not in the same way. But I don't go to this stuff. Clinical trial registrations I do use: clinicaltrials.gov, ISRCTN, and EduAct if you're doing CTIMS. Between the three of those, almost every clinical trial will be in one of those ones. Okay, so what have we talked about? Oh, something I broke it. So in summary, then we talked about how to work with your librarian and what they're going to need. That's the key takeaway message. And the most important thing is to express your question as a PICO. But don't just go with the PICO, go with your synonym table that you produced just from basic clinical understanding of the area. And they will be able to take that and turn it into a list of synonyms for each of the databases they're going to search. And they might search 2 or 3 databases typically. And by taking the synonyms and a good understanding of the hierarchy, the mesh terms, and using those Boolean operators, they'll produce a search tree that works really well. And hopefully you only get a couple of hundred hits as opposed to tens of thousands. And the difference is really pretty remarkable. So it's a bit of a dry topic, but actually a lot of work that we do is produced off the back of good systematic review work. And it's infrequent that you'll get a high quality study, prospective study funded, and then subsequently published if you haven't done this baseline work. So it's a bit boring, it's a bit tedious, but it has to be done. Does that make sense? Have you got any questions for the guys online? Must have one question about searching.